When I was asked to speak about my life growing up in a military family, I wasn't sure about the relevance of it to Remembrance Day. I looked up the meaning of the day and found that the Federal Department of Veteran Affairs Canada says that the day is of remembrance of the men and women who have served and continue to serve our country during time of war, conflict, and peace. I figured maybe I could take it a step further and include families of these men and women. The spouses were a group of amazing people, and in my day growing up, the spouses were predominantly women. They literally held down the fort when needed. But it would require a rather lengthy talk to cover the story of the life of a spouse. Instead, I'd like to take you on a journey of my life as a child of the military, otherwise known as, yes, the Army brat. I owe my existence to World War II. My father, Thomas Francis Mode, fondly known as Frank, was born in Toronto, Ontario in 1923. Following high school, he studied architectural drafting. It was a job, but not a passion, unfortunately. Frank was 19 when World War II broke out, and he joined the Royal Canadian Ordnance Corps in Toronto as a private. A short while later, he was posted to a depot in the small town of Farnham, Quebec, that lies about 50 kilometers south of Montreal. The military had a camp there, and Frank was involved with the training of soldiers for combat. Interestingly, Farnham also had an internment camp housing prisoners of war, including combatant German prisoners, and it was just one of 25 camps throughout Canada. In this same town lived a lovely young lady named Una Bear, who hailed from one of the English families in Farnham. She worked for the Canadian Pacific Railway, and on weekends her older brother would take her to the dances hosted by the Legion ladies. One fateful evening, she met a handsome young private and began dating this soldier, who was to become the love of her life. Frank was eventually slated to go overseas, but then came the much-awaited news. The war had ended. By now, Frank realized he had finally found his passion, the military. He took officer's training in Kingston, Ontario, and became a second lieutenant, transferring to the PPCLI, the Princess Patricia Light Infantry. Una and Frank became engaged, and as luck would have it, in 1946, the Army posted Frank to Currie Barracks in Calgary, Alberta. Over the next 2 years, they corresponded through letters, and Frank would head for Quebec every time he was on leave. The course of true love prevailed, and in 1948, my brave young mother packed her suitcase, boarded a train accompanied by her dad, and headed to Calgary to wed Frank and begin her life, or her career, as a military wife. This is where I entered the picture, a year later, and life was good. The Army then sent Dad and his new family to Griesbaugh Barracks in Edmonton, Alberta, where my sister Patricia was born. A year later, Dad was promoted to captain, and he transferred to the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. The Army, in all its wisdom, decided they needed Dad back in Calgary. While there, my brother was born, Michael. Are you starting to see a pattern forming there? A year later, in 1954, Dad was sent to Indochina. The area was comprised of Thailand, Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. It's now known as Southeast Asia. He was a member of the International Control Commission. It comprised of troops and officers from Canada, Poland, and India, and was to report on the progress of the ceasefire set in place by the Geneva Accord. This was an incredible experience for Dad. However, as he was gone for just over a year, it was not an easy time for my mom back in Calgary with 3 young children and no family to help out. We lived in the PMQs, the permanent married quarters, so there was endless supply of children for us to play with. And thanks goodness there was company for Mom just a door or two away. This is rather coincidental to the song that Renee shared with us. I remember when Dad came home, I was over the moon. My 3-year-old sister, Patricia, was nervous of him, but she shyly adapted to him in her life again. However, my brother Michael, who was a year old when Dad left, had no memory of him and had trouble understanding who was this person in our house. The first day Dad was home, he went upstairs to have a shower. Poor Michael followed up behind him. Minutes later, he came down the stairs with huge eyes and a look of horror on his face. He whispered, "Mommy, that man is in our bathtub." And the man was how he referred to Dad for some time. I think this must have been a rather unsettling experience for my parents. But onward and upward, we were posted again, this time to Camp Borden, Ontario. You guessed it, Brother Paul was born there. Unfortunately, there were no PMQs available that first year, so we lived in the small town of Alliston, close to camp. With no school nearby, I ended up staying in Toronto during the week, living with my grandparents, and took my grade 2 there. Finally, we were able to move into a PMQ, and I spent 2 whole years in the same school in Camp Borden. It was heavenly. But all good things must come to an end. Yes, we were posted back to Calgary in 1959. And yes, Sister Jennifer was born. Dad took another officer's training course and was now promoted to the rank of major. The Queen's Own Rifles was one of Canada's frontline infantry battalions and was asked to serve on NATO duty in Germany from 1960 to 1963. Once again, it was time to pack up. This time, almost all of our belongings were put in storage for the 3 years we were stationed in northern Germany. This was a significant time in history. The Berlin Wall was being constructed, not torn down, and the Cold War was at its peak. Dad was the commanding officer of one of the frontline elements, Delta Company, and he and the troops were frequently deployed to various ADPs, which I guess is Advanced Defensive Positions. This left Mom alone with 5 children to care for in a foreign country. It was to become a very tense time as the Cuban Missile Crisis came front and center, and was to bring the world the closest it has ever been to nuclear war. On numerous occasions, usually in the dead of night, Dad was summoned from his bed and joined his troops as they were deployed to undetermined lengths of time to wherever. I was 12 years old at the time and oblivious to the tension surrounding us. We had no TV, no malls, and the phone was not for the use of young people just wanting to chat. We had to create our own entertainment. Thus, 6 of my friends and I formed a club called the Secret Seven. We were inspired by the British book series of the same name. It was about a group of children who were always finding murder and mystery on the moors. One of our mandates was to find and solve our own mystery. So, with pen and notebook in hand, we scoured the neighborhood looking for adventure day in and day out. Early one evening in mid-October 1962, we saw a convoy of army lorries pulling up to our school and unloading boxes of food rations. Aha! Our mystery was afoot. We decided to split up and proceeded to interview the poor, hapless young soldiers who were driving the lorries. My interviewee seemed only too happy to talk to me. I'm guessing he was rather bored sitting there. I'm not sure what he thought of me writing down his words in my little notebook, but he kept a straight face. He proceeded to say that a very bad man named Khrushchev, no, this was not an easy name for me to try and spell in my little book. Well, Khrushchev might start a big war, and if he did, we families would be sent home to Canada, and our dads would remain in Germany. He explained there was a bunker under the school, and it was being stocked with food and supplies for our soldiers in case war broke out. On October 28, 1963, the world sighed in relief as the superpowers reached an agreement and Khrushchev dismantled all nuclear missiles in Cuba and returned them to Russia. Life continued on as usual for us. We often traveled throughout Germany and Austria, and once to Italy. But our favorite place to holiday was the nearby Holland. During World War II, the Canadian Army played a major role in the liberation of the Dutch people who had suffered terrible hunger and hardships under the German occupiers. 7,600 Canadian soldiers died in the 9-month campaign to liberate the Netherlands, a tremendous sacrifice in the cause of freedom. The Dutch people have never forgotten these soldiers. They call them their Canadian boys. And to this day, they treat Canadians with respect and fondness. Dad would sometimes wear his uniform when we traveled, and I like to think he was your ideal handsome young Canadian soldier. We were treated well by the Dutch, especially when Dad was in uniform, and when we went into various shops, we children were given slices of meat or candy, and once we received a souvenir of ceramic Dutch clogs. The most poignant memory I have of Holland occurred when we were walking along a street in a small town and we met an elderly couple coming our way. When they saw Dad in his uniform, they stopped and spoke to him in Dutch. The man finally just smiled and shook his hand. The elderly woman took Dad's hand and held it in both of hers for a moment. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes, and then she bent and gently kissed his hand. At the time, I didn't completely understand the role the Canadian soldiers had played in World War II in Holland, but I was still deeply moved by the moment and will carry that moment with me forever. Shortly before we left for Germany in 1963, we took one of our most amazing holidays to Yugoslavia. It was a communist country and actually a Soviet satellite state. So it took a lot of paperwork for a Canadian soldier to receive permission to travel there. We drove south along the coastline for many hours and did not encounter another car the whole time. People walking, riding bikes, or in mule-drawn carts, but no cars. Blue skies, turquoise water, endless white sand, and friendly people. A little piece of heaven in those days. There were a few tense moments when we were crossing into Yugoslavia. As we drove up to the border, a young soldier, armed with a rifle, came out of the small customs shack and checked Dad's papers. He looked into the car and told us to wait while he went into the shack. He came out with 2 more armed soldiers, and they too looked into the window of the car at us. Finally, one of the men shook his head and said to Dad, "5 Kinder? 5 Kinder?" Little did they know, Mom was just 2 months away from delivering James, making that 6 Kinder. On November 22nd, we flew home to Canada, leaving behind so many wonderful friends and memories. While over the Atlantic Ocean, we were given the news that President J.F. Kennedy had been assassinated. I hate to admit it, but it was quite a disappointment to my siblings and me during the next 5 days, as all TV stations were airing the news about the assassination and the funeral. We had waited 3 long years to see handsome Dr. Ben Casey, Dr. Kildare, Bonanza, My 3 Sons, The Wonderful World of Disney. Those 5 days of waiting for regular programming seemed like an eternity. Our flight from Germany landed in Trenton, Ontario, not too far from some of the Eastern Army camps. But with Army logic, we were posted to one of the most Western camps in Canada, Work Point Barracks in Esquimalt, just outside of Victoria, BC. Lo and behold, no baby put in an appearance. So we got a cat. Jamie was the youngest, was our little German, and we continued to call him that for several years. One evening, we were discussing World War II at the supper table. Finally, 4-year-old Jamie asked, "Well, who won the war?" And we answered, "Well, we did." Minutes later, we realized silent tears were running down his face. When he was asked what was wrong, he sobbed, "I lost the war." We decided it was time to put the name Little German to rest. I finished the last 6 months of grade 9 in Esquimalt in my first public school. I was overwhelmed by the big classes and being the new guy in an environment where most kids had grown up together. I hated it. Thus, I was more than happy to transfer and take my grade 10 in a private convent school in Victoria, St. Anne's Academy. Navy tunic, white shirt, tie, tam, black stockings, and really ugly black shoes were the order of the day, but it suited me just fine. In spring of 1965, Dad was sent on a 6-month tour of duty with the United Nations newly formed peacekeeping force. He was sent to the island of Cyprus. The period of violent conflict between the Greek and Turk Cypriots was finally over, but the UN forces were there to prevent a reoccurrence of the fighting. Mom was once again a single parent, raising 6 children, ranging from 2 years old to 16-year-old. How fun was that? We all enjoyed living in Vancouver Island, but the Army was a harsh taskmaster. And in the fall of 1965, our dear old Volkswagen station wagon was packed with luggage, 2 adults, 6 kids, and 1 cat. We were headed to Edmonton, Alberta. Rather than getting easier, it was getting harder for me to walk into a new classroom again. I recall being shy, quiet, and uncomfortable in class. Maybe it was fortunate I only made a few friends in grade 11, because within the year, the Moe family was on the move again, this time to Penhold Air Base, just outside of Red Deer, Alberta. Dad was now the provincial warning officer for Alberta, and was in command of the underground bunker by the air base. The bunker was designed and constructed as a safe place where members of the military and provincial government could be housed, protected, and work from in the event of nuclear war. The only thing you saw was a grassy hill with a little door in it, rather like a hobbit house. I only had the chance to go into the bunker once, but what a shock. It was like a miniature city inside. Once I was through the guarded set of doors, I was on a U-shaped rotunda with rooms off to each side. And when I looked down, there was a whole other floor below me, with many people moving around, phones ringing, and a general air of controlled busyness. I'm not sure how many of you remember the TV show The Man from U.N.C.L.E., but the secret command center, their secret command center, was very similar to the bunker. Dad finished out his career in Penhold and retired in 1972, 30 years a soldier. Mom and Dad bought an acreage just outside of Red Deer where they lived happily till Dad passed away at the age of 80. Mom made one final move to Edmonton to be near my 2 sisters and now resides in a care home. She's 92 years old, and although her body is failing her, her mind is as sharp as a tack. Military wives are a strong breed of people. I finished grade 12 in Red Deer, and thus ended a run of 9 schools in 12 years. 5 of those schools were in the 4 years of high school. I feel so fortunate to have fallen in love with a man who was happy to settle on the farm, live between 2 great communities, and stay put for almost 40 years. I took growing up in the military for granted, but I now realize the amazing experience I've had, not counting the schools, and I have come to understand how hard it must have been for my dad to adjust from his day at work, where what he said was never challenged and his commands were met with, "Yes, sir," to having to come home to 6 young people who challenged everything he said, whined when asked to do something, and figured house rules only applied for a week or so and then fell by the wayside. I have to say my respect and admiration and love for my gentle, kind mother knows no bounds. Mom was the glue that held our family together through thick and thin of military life. She filled our lives with love and continues to do so to this day. I am an Army brat and proud of it. Thank you.